Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Moongha Invaders from Martin Wallace and his company Tree Frog Games. I've become something of a Martin Wallace fanboy, at least a minor one, in the last year or so. I've been playing more and more of his more recent games that have, I've really appreciated them. Some of his older games I don't have as much of an interest in playing because they're more heavier, like train games and economic games, but he's definitely taken a turn for more thematic releases. And of course, just look at the box for Moongha Invaders, and you can see that that is on full display here. This was actually an older game that I never played that was funded through Kickstarter for a new edition of it, and a very long time passed, and it was finally released, and through a friend I got a copy of the official Kickstarter version. So I will go ahead and mention now that the Kickstarter version of the game, which maybe it will be available to normal retail, like as a deluxe edition, but has a special 2-player mode, which is completely different, other than using some of the same pieces, than the 3 or 4-player game. So this is a 2 to 4-player game, but the 2-player version is way different, and I'll cover both of them just so I can show you the differences. Now, no matter which version of the game you're playing, the theme is essentially the same. There's a mad scientist, or in the multiplayer game, multiple mad scientists, who are creating these monsters. They all seem to have the same blueprints for monsters, though, and they are flooding the different cities of the world with them. In the 2-player game, it's just one city. And the human populace is trying to rise up against them with infantry and tanks, and also these heroes who are much better than the normal infantry, are trying to destroy these monsters. But you are one of the mad scientists in the multiplayer game, and one player is the mad scientist in the 2-player game, and you are trying to destroy the world. You're trying to destroy as many of these cities as you possibly can in order to get points to win in the multiplayer game. Sometimes you have to take out your opponents, and sometimes you have to grow as many monsters as you possibly can and let the monsters do some of your dirty work of getting points for you. And in the 2-player game, it is humans representing one player, monsters representing the other, and it's a free-for-all in one single city. Let me go ahead and give you a brief look, hopefully, of how both of the games work. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think about both of them. Alright, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of the 2 different ways to play Moongha Invaders. We'll start off with the 3 to 4 player game. This is a competitive game where you are trying to get the most points by the end of either 8 or 9 rounds of play, depending on how many players you're playing with, 3 or 4 respectively. However, the game can also end prematurely if one player puts out all of their rubble pieces, or if all of the brown rubble pieces are put out onto the board. Those are sort of neutral human rubble pieces that could come out as the humans start destroying pieces of the board. But that's much more rare than the game ending in one of the other 2 ways. Now, every player is going to have a set of colored monster figures, and you're going to have your own parcel of the board where they're kind of like your stat bar for all of your different monsters. It will tell you all of them are the same. Like, in other words, every player has the exact same set of monsters, just in a different color. You have Mekor, who's a giant robot, and I should mention that the Mekor minis are pretty much the only one that is consistently messed up. The bases are all bent and wobbly. The minis sort of tilt over, and the arms are in different spots for each of them. It's kind of weird. All the other ones are okay. You have Mooger the ogre. You have bloobs. There's 3 bloobs because they can multiply. You have the Shagoo, who's like some weird looking Chewbacca type thing. You have the Spector, who looks like one of the Shoggoths kind of from Lovecraft. The Drakurs, who are like vampire peoples. They're not painted, so it's kind of hard to tell the features on these. These aren't like the highest quality miniatures. And then you have the Kiddoos, who are like these little garbage pail kids types looking things. Now, intervening against all these giant monsters that you and the other players are going to be inflicting upon the city are a lot of human forces. You have normal infantry, there's tanks, aircraft carriers, even a tactical nuke, and there are hero characters who might be coming out onto the board, and those are actually the dice you'll be using during the course of the game. Now, the game is going to last for either 8 or 9 rounds, depending on whether you play with 3 or 4 players, respectively. However, the game can also end prematurely if one player puts out all of their rubble pieces in anyway. They put out all their rubble pieces on the board, period. Also, if all of the human factions pieces are put onto the board because they've destroyed most of the city, that will also end the game. And the goal is to have the most points by the time, however the game is going to end. You're going to get points in a number of different ways. One of them has to do with just destroying parts of the city. As you destroy parts of the city with your monsters, you're going to get points depending upon, at the end of the game, how many you have compared to your opponent in certain spots of the city. So for instance, if you have put at least one rubble piece in one of the cities on the board and you are in first place in that city, you're going to score 4 victory points at the end. Second place only gets 1 point, and there's special scoring for if there's a tie as well. Now, hand in hand with cities being destroyed, you also have these city tiles, which are going to be randomly distributed to the players, either 2 of them in a 4-player game or 3 of them in a 3-player game. And each of these depicts one of the cities out on the board, like Los Angeles, New York, London, Berlin, Moscow, so on and so forth. You get these tiles randomly, you look at them secretly and keep them hidden. They are your sort of protected cities. As a mad scientist, you want to protect those cities, and you lose points as the other monsters in the game destroy those cities. So you want to prevent that from happening as much as possible, which might lead to you fighting the other monsters. The other ways that you can get points actually involve the monsters that you have under your control. So for instance, the Moogers here, like Frankenstein's monster ogre type creatures, they can actually, when they kill other monsters, they get to claim them as trophies, and they get a number of victory points equal to whatever their damage capacity is. So for instance, if he actually manages to kill one of the mech horrors, their damage capacity is 6, so that's 6 victory points. So that's a pretty big coup right there. The other one that gives you points are the Drakors. The Drakors are like the vampires, and theirs is a bit odd. They basically want to go into cities and stay hidden and keep other monsters out. They sort of take control of cities behind the scenes. So you score 3 victory points for each Drakor you have on the board, but you score 1 less for each Drakor for each other monster in the area. So if there was a Drakor at the end of the game here, even if it's my own monsters, if there's one other monster there, he's only worth 2 victory points. If there was 2 other monsters there, he would only be worth 1 victory point, and so on. Now, everything in this game is done via actions, and how the turn structure is going to work is the traditional, I take an action, you take an action, you take an action, you take an action, and then we keep going around until people pass. Although in this game, passing is a bit weird. We'll get back to that. On the board, you have these 6 different types of actions. How the game works is essentially taking things from these spaces. So when it's your turn, you can say, I'm taking one of these, I forget the proper name, but the creation heal tokens, and you do something with that. Or I'm going to take the movement token, the move hide token, and decide to move or hide with one of my creatures. In other words, in order to take the action, there has to be something in one of these boxes for you to actually take. And you'll set these up with a certain amount at the start of the game, which actually depends upon the track here. The turn track will tell you how many attack tokens go in the attack box, and then you'll roll the dice, however many dice it tells you to roll, to determine where the other ones go. So, for instance, if I were to roll a 1, a 6, and a 4, I would look at where the dice for 1, 6, and 4 are. So they're in Creation and Heal, Heroes, and Military 2. And then I would put pieces in those spots corresponding to that. Also, inherently, there are some tokens that will come out at the start of the game and at the for the duration when you do the reset for every round. So, for instance, in the move hide tokens, if there's 3 players, you're going to have 1 token here. If there's 4 players, you'll have 2. In the creation heal, you're going to have 7 or 10 plus 2 on your first turn, but then it resets to 7 or 10 every round. But remember, it could always get more because of the dice rolls. Now, going through these really quickly, the creation and heal action, you take one of these tokens and you can do one of 2 different things with it. The first and the main thing you'll be doing for most of the game is just putting it onto one of your monster stat boxes here. When it hits the orange number total, so for instance, for the Moogha here, it says there's a 4 there. So as soon as I get to 4 tokens on this Moogha, I can immediately evolve and place this hidden monster token for the Moogha. So I have created a Moogha, and he gets to go out into the city, and he remains hidden. And he can go out into any city of my choice. Some of the other monsters have different rules for that. Now, alternatively, during the course of the game, the monsters might take damage either from the human forces or from other monsters, and when that happens, you're going to put these brown damage markers on them. These are the human rubble pieces. They double use as damage markers. You can take the orange tokens as your action in order to heal one of those damage for every token that you take, which sometimes might be better because you don't want to have to work your way up to evolving the monster again if it gets killed. The next type of token, and something you're going to be doing a lot of, second only to the orange tokens, is the attack box. You're going to start off with a certain amount of these depending on the turn order track, and that number escalates during the course of the game to the point where at the end of the game, if it gets to around 8 or 9, there's going to be 10 tokens before you even roll the dice and potentially add more. So the game sort of escalates at a certain point. When you choose to take an attack token, you have two options for it. You can either store it on a monster. So, for instance, if I have my Spector created, I can go ahead and store an attack token on him. Or I can immediately use that attack token and make an attack and possibly use all the other attack tokens I've stored from before. The reason for this is because the white number down here in the stat box is how many dice you get to roll when you spend a single attack token. But if you've been storing attack tokens, when you take an attack token, you can use all of them or some of them at once in order to roll even more dice at the same time. Now, some of the bigger monsters, which, by the way, the Bloob, the Moongha, and the Mechor are the only ones that can damage cities, hence it has the little explosion symbol next to their numbers. But the bigger monsters, Moongha and Mechor, can actually roll more than one die per attack token that is spent. So if I spent three attack tokens to attack with the Moongha, it would roll a total of 6 dice for that single attack. But if your monster is killed with a bunch of attack tokens on it, then unless you have more of them out on the board, hence like the Bloob or the Drakors, you lose all those attack tokens. So it's a sort of push your luck thing, like how many of those do you actually want to stock up. Also, noting that if you can only take the attack action if you take a token, which means you could stock up a bunch of tokens, but then if all of the tokens are gone from the box for the round, you will not be able to do anything else for this round until the next round when those tokens will reset. And attacking in this game is super simple. First off, you have to just determine what your targets are. You can attack another monster in your space. You can attack human targets, although first you have to attack tanks, and then it's tanks and heroes, and then infantry. But you can choose to attack the monsters separately. If you are one of the big 3 monsters, the Bloob, the Moongha, or the Mechor, you can attack the city, but only once all of the human resistance is gone. When attacking, you just roll however many dice you have coming to you from the attack tokens that you spent, and only 4s, 5s, and 6s count as hits. If you're dealing damage to a city, you get to put rubble pieces down into the city. Next action is the move hide action. Very simply, you take whatever token happens to be there, the purple token. If there may not be, though, unless more have been put there, that doesn't replenish as much as some of the other ones. And you get to move your monster a number of spaces, in adjacent spaces indicated by whatever their purple number is. So the Moongha gets to move 2 spaces, whereas some of the other ones get to move 1 or possibly 3. The Spector and the Shagu are very fast in that regard. The hide token means that if they've already revealed themselves through an attack, that's right, I should have mentioned as well. So if you have a monster that is hiding and it reveals itself, then you'll put its miniature out onto the board. While it's hiding, it can't be attacked or anything like that, although the heroes can make the Drakors pop out from hiding. But if you're already revealed, you can take one of the move hide tokens to hide again as well. Then you have the heroes. If you choose to take the hero action, you're physically going to take one of the heroes that is in the space, and all the heroes act the same, even though these sculpts are a little bit different for all of them. And you're going to put the hero out onto the board in a space and make an attack against the monsters that are there. First off, if there's any monsters hiding in that city, you get to make a roll in order to reveal them. You roll a die against every hidden monster, and any 4 or more that comes up means that monster has been revealed, and they have to put their figure out onto the board. The more heroes that are there, the more dice you get to roll in order to make this happen. Every hero in the city makes an attack against any revealed Drakors that are in the city. If you roll a 4 or more, you destroy those Drakors. So heroes are really about rooting out the monsters and also killing the Drakors. In fact, those are the only things that can kill the Drakors, aside from other Drakors. So heroes and Drakors can kill Drakors. Now, if there's more than one player's Drakors in the city, including yours, you choose which ones they target first, but all of the attack dice must be resolved, which means you might kill your own Drakors as well. Finally, if there are any other military units in the city, like the infantry or tanks, they are going to attack after the heroes get their attack, and they're going to attack any monsters of your choice. So essentially, even though it's the human forces, you taking that action is having you control them. The final type of action is the military action. There's two different boxes for this, and the reason why they have this escalating amount here is because when you roll the dice, if more than one die goes into the military 1 or 2 boxes, you put out a different amount of figures. So if one die goes into the military 1 box at once, you put out an infantry. If 2 of them go, then you put an infantry into this box. If 2 of them are rolled, you put a tank into the box. If 3 of them are rolled, you put a bomber jet in there, and finally, and this doesn't happen all that often, you put a nuke there. And just like with the heroes, when you take this action, you're physically going to take one of the military pieces from one of these 2 boxes and put it into a city of your choice, and then it attacks the revealed monsters. The infantry get to roll 2 dice when they attack. The armor, they call them armors, but their tanks get to roll 3 dice. Now, the fighter jets and the A-bomb work a little bit differently. If you select the jet fighter, you roll 4 dice, but every one results in 1 point of collateral damage to the city. So you put down the brown rubble pieces. The A-bomb is even worse at that. Essentially, you remove any human units in the city that you choose to drop the A-bomb on. And then you roll 8 dice against every monster in the city, and then again you roll 8 dice for the city itself. And it doesn't matter whether the monsters are revealed or hidden, they are all potentially taking damage. The final type of action you can take is passing, and passing works a little bit differently than most type of games that have this sort of action pass type system. You have a pass marker, and when you choose to pass, you're going to put your pass marker down into one of the action boxes, like so. Now, if all 3 or 4 players pass, the round ends, and you do the round reset, take your pass markers back, okay. But if the game is not ended, and it gets back to your turn, meaning the other players have not passed, you can choose to take the action of the box that you put your pass marker in, even if there are no tokens there. So, if I had put this into the hero box, I'd get to put a hero that's in the stock, if there is one in stock, out onto the board. If I had put it in the attack box, I would get to take an attack token, even if there wasn't one there. If there is one there, I would take that one. Actually, I take that back. It might be that you always take it from the stock. But in any case, you get to take the action. But this is still considered to be passing, which means that while if the other players stay in the game, you can continue to... They might still be doing things with their normal turns, but even if you've decided to pass, you are not completely out of the round. So you'll take the action by taking your pass marker back. Then on the next round, you can choose to pass again and put your pass marker back down, and it's probably not going to happen again, but if it comes back to your turn, you can take that marker back and take the action of that box. In other words, all of the other players have to have passed at some point in order for the round to be over. It's kind of a weird thing, but that's just kind of how it works in this game. So the last thing I'm going to explain is just the differences between the monsters. They all are a little bit different. I've mentioned some of the differences, but I'll go through them anyways. The Kiddu is the weakest of the monsters, although he is also the fastest. But the thing about him is that when he is tag teamed with another monster in a city, he can attack along with that monster. So if I have him with a Moongha and the Moongha spends an attack token to attack, he gets to make an attack as well, although he could attack on his own too. The Drakors, as I mentioned, can only be killed by other Drakors and by heroes, and they are worth victory points at the end of the game, depending on how many other monsters are in the city with them. The Spector... just having him out on the board modifies your movement. You can move 2 monsters or one monster twice when you take a movement token. The Shagu also has a weird power. You can attack hidden monsters, and both of them will be revealed. The Bloog is interesting because the way that he works is that the first one of him that you build costs you 3 orange tokens. The second one, though, and possibly third, only costs you 2 orange tokens, but it has to be either in the same city or a connected city because he's spreading and multiplying. He's also one of the few monsters that can attack cities, and when he makes an attack, every blue that's on the board makes an attack. It's a weak attack, but because they have like this hive mind thing going on, they all get to attack. The Moongha can kill other monsters. When he kills other monsters, he gets to claim them as trophies, which not only gets him points at the end of the game, but also takes a monster out of another player's stock, which can be pretty debilitating, especially if he kills a Makor. And then finally, the Makor has no real special ability other than he is the most powerful monster. He can take 6 damage and deals 3 damage every time that he spends a token, which of course can be used to attack cities. Okay, that is a probably too long, or perhaps not long enough, overview of the 3 or 4 player game of Moongha Invaders. Let's talk about the 2 player game. Alright, this is the starting setup for the 2 player game. As you can see, it looks completely different. This is actually the other side of the 3 or 4 player game board. And I'm using the yellow monster pieces, which are a set of pieces just like all the other sets from the 3 or 4 player game. But you're only using most of the monsters. The only ones you're not using are the extra Drakors. You'll see each player has their own side of the board, so there's the monsters. You're not using the extra Drakors, you're only using one of them. You are using all of the blue pieces, but only one of them is going to start off on the game board. So one player is all the monsters, and the other player is all of the heroes of the game. So there's all 5 of the heroes, and they'll also be out on the game board. You're actually going to use this set of numbered tokens to randomly determine where all of these pieces are going to go out on the cityscape. There'll be the numbers on the board. The monster player will start off putting out his 7 monsters total, and then the hero is going to randomly draw tiles to put out the 5 heroes. The monsters will also have 12 pieces of rubble, rubble pieces in their play area, while the human player will have all 20 of the brown rubble pieces, and each player has their own deck of cards, which they're going to shuffle up and draw 6 from. Now, these cards are going to dictate the actions that you get to take during the course of the game. So, for instance, they're going to look something like this. They're either going to let you move or activate one hero twice, or 2 different heroes twice, and some of them are going to have special symbols that represent different abilities you can use during the course of the game. So duck means that you can get a hero out of harm's way immediately. There's ones like this that let you activate all of the heroes, or this one which can let you activate 2 heroes, but it can also be discarded to give a +1 to your die rolls. The monster cards are basically the same. Of course, they're going to have the monsters pictured on them, and those are the ones you get to activate. Some of them also have rubble, which indicates that the attack can be used to destroy parts of the city. And in fact, speaking of that, the goals of this game change depending on which side you're on. So if you are the humans, the heroes, then what you need to do, your goal is to kill the Makor, all 3 of the bloobs, and the Moongha, so the 3 most powerful of the monsters. If you can kill those 3, the others are weak enough that you can just whittle them down as time goes on, but you need to take care of the 3 big monstrosities out on the board. Whereas the monsters want to either kill all of the heroes or destroy all 12 of the buildings that are out on the map. Now, you may also have noticed that there are different pieces out on the board. The good news for the heroes are that there was a previous squad of heroes that were all wiped out. That's not the good news. The good news is that their bodies are still there along with all the equipment that they have. So when a hero moves into a space, they can claim the equipment that's there. You have an energy drink, you have body armor, you've got different types of weapons, there's a medical kit, there's somewhere around here, I didn't put these out in a particular way. There's dynamite and flamethrower and rocket launchers, all of which you can add to your heroes to augment their abilities, but they start off face down. You don't get to see what they are and take them until you get into their spaces. Speaking of their stuff and what the heroes can do, let's take a look at them. Each of the heroes has a different special ability and amount of damage that they can take. Raven here gets +1 to close combat and has a handgun with her. Then you have Skull, who has 2 different weapons with him, the SMG and the shrapnel grenade, which both can attack from range. So you see here, if we can focus in on that a little bit. Now, how it works on this side of the board as far as attacks go is that in order to hit, first off, there will be a tiny number in either a crosshair or this little explosion. That crosshair indicates just a ranged attack, and The explosion indicates an area of effect, which are always a little bit more difficult. What you always do is roll 2 of the dice and then see if you can meet or beat the number in either the crosshair or the explosion. So if I roll 2 dice for the SMG, I need to roll a 7 or more in order to hit. If with the shrapnel grenade, I need to roll an 8 or more in order to hit. And then if I do hit, I get to deal that much damage in the orange section of the bottom part of the box. The range is very simply how far away in squares I can attack with that weapon. Skull also has an ability which, under certain circumstances, he can discard a card with his picture on it in order to draw 2 more cards. Then we have Billy, who has a shotgun and a bow. Arnie, who gets a bonus at close combat, but also has an SMG and dynamite. And Joe, who gives covering fire, which says that if he uses his MMG against a monster, then each hero adjacent to Joe, orthogonally or diagonally, can have a free move. And in fact, I should mention that too, because not every game is clear on this. You can, in this game, movement can be either orthogonal or diagonal. Moongha and Mechor, however, cannot move into buildings. Only the smaller monsters and the heroes can do so. We'll go over the monster abilities too. It's upside down, so that's going to be kind of tough, but we'll go ahead and do it anyways. Kidoo has 2 things unique about him. First is that he can move 3 spaces. Most of the other monsters can move 2. Bloob can only move 1, but Kidoo can move 3. The other thing is that since he's kind of humanoid, he can pick up the equipment in spaces out on the board. He's the only monster that can pick it up and use it. He can only use 1 at a time, however, and he uses the equipment in the same way that the heroes do. Then we have Shagu. He, just like in the other game, he has the powers of camouflage as well. Any hero that uses an aimed weapon against him has a -2 to their dice. And he also has laser vision that can go 14 spaces away and hit for a point of damage. So the Bloob is probably the most complicated of the monsters in the game, and because he works kind of weird, just like in the other side of the board. You're going to start off with 1 Bloob on the board. Instead of using one of your actions, your move actions with the Bloob, you can instead put out another or both blue pieces connected to the original blue piece on the board, and then they can either move independently of each other or stay connected. And they can only be hurt by area of effect attacks, and if it takes more than 4 or more points of damage, one of the bloobs gets permanently removed. In fact, but you can also pull back bloobs onto your player board if you really want to, but at least 1 bloob always has to stay out on the board. He also is really nasty to the heroes. He automatically wins all close combat. He'll automatically absorb and kill whatever hero attacks him in close combat, and absorb and destroy their equipment as well. In fact, if he moves over face-up equipment on the board, he kills that automatically too. Now, Spector is really interesting because he can control other monsters. If you play a card with his symbol on it and he has line of sight to another monster, you can activate that monster as if you were activating Spector with the Spector symbol. Then we have the Dracours. They can't be damaged by ranged attacks, but they can be damaged in close combat. They are, however, automatically hit by silver bullets, which is interesting and thematic. They get a +1 modifier when they're in close combat, as a matter of fact, so that's their jam right there. Moongha's really good at close combat. He gets +3 modifier, and he gets 2 damage rather than 1 if it wins. He also has the inherent ability, as depicted on his tile, to throw rubble as a ranged attack. But like I said, he can't enter a building space. And then finally, you have Mechor. It has a Heat Ray ranged attack, which does 6 points of damage, which is essentially enough to kill any hero in the game. So it is a lethal weapon. No pun intended. And again, just like the Bloob, he automatically wins close combat and deals 2 points by doing so, and he can't enter buildings. So how the turn breakdown is going to work, you always start with the heroes, and you'll have 6 cards in hand at the start of the game. You play as many cards as you want. You'll draw back up 3 after you're done. Heroes also have the ability to press their luck and gamble that they can draw a card from their deck with the symbol of the hero that they want to activate. So let's say I'm going to gamble that I can get a bonus action with Raven, and then you draw a card from the top of your deck. If you're correct and it has the Raven symbol, you can take a bonus action with that character right then and there. If you're wrong, you have to discard a card from your hand. But and as soon as you do that, your turn is going to be over. But if you continue to guess correctly, you can keep doing so, but you can only do that if you have at least one card in your hand left to lose. When you choose to activate one of your characters, there's only 3 different actions that you can take. You can move your character, and by moving a character, if that would put the character into into an enemy space, into a monster space, you wouldn't do that to the blue, you do it to Drakor. Then you immediately initiate close combat. Otherwise, you can't occupy a space with enemies, and you can't occupy a space permanently with your friendly figures, although you can move through their spaces and even trade items with your friendly figures as a hero as well. You also can do a ranged attack, so if you have a special ranged attack weapon and there is a target within range, you can use your action with that character on the card in order to make that ranged attack. And finally, as a monster, you can destroy a building. Now, the only way that you can destroy a building is if you have a card that has that rubble symbol next to it, and if that, not just on the card, it has to specifically be a rubble symbol next to the picture of the monster. So in other words, with this card, Makor himself has to destroy a building, and if he does so, very simply, he's going to take one of the rubble markers for the monsters and put it on the building. It destroys the entire building, not just a section of it. If there's any equipment that's still there, it gets discarded without looking at it. Of other little odds and ends, you can only have a maximum of 8 cards in hand, and the monster faction only has the ability to, instead of discarding a card, they can permanently destroy a card if it's just not doing them any good, because if your monsters are killed. So if my Makor has been destroyed, I have no use for a card that only has Makor, or let's say Makor and Moongha has been destroyed. There's no use for any of those cards, so I would just remove them from the deck. And that's it. That's a quick run through of both versions of Moongha Invaders. Remember, for the 2-player version, you either, as the heroes, want to kill the monsters, or all the big monsters. As the monster faction, you either want to kill all the heroes or destroy all 12 buildings. Now, let's get to my final thoughts. All right, well, thematically, I'm on board with the game completely, no matter which game mode we're talking about. I mean, it's kind of got that King of Tokyo feel to it, but in this case, it's King of Tokyo mixed with like Euro game area control elements, and the idea that you're mad scientists unleashing these monsters on the world, and they are more of like your movie-style monsters, not necessarily anime-style monsters, but like the Blob who splits and spreads out over the city, and the giant mecha robot that rises from the ocean and just starts destroying stuff, and the vampires that can be hiding in the city and pop out. I mean, really interesting thematic things there. I actually like the art style of the game. It's kind of goofy, and some people that I played with did not like it so much, but I dug it. I thought it worked well for the tenor of the game, which is like, it's supposed to be like that sort of goofy, campy, monster type vibe. I mean, it's called Moongha Invaders. I don't even know what Moongha is, but that's what the game is. It's not supposed to be taken that seriously, and I think that the vibe and the graphic design all works pretty well for that. As far as the actual physical bits, I was actually shocked because, again, I didn't know too much about this game before I actually popped it open and started playing it. I was shocked at how many miniatures there were, and I mean, a lot of them are very cool, but they're definitely not like high quality miniatures. I showed in the video that especially the Makor, or I don't know how to pronounce any of these things, but the Makor minis are definitely bent. I mean, the base is bent. They don't stand upright. At least a couple of them don't. And the mini itself is all twisted and bent over, and the arms are in different directions. And some of the other minis are okay. Some of them are bent as well, but not nearly as noticeable as the bigger minis are. And while it's okay for me, at least one person I played with who actually is into miniatures and paints them and is a hobby miniaturist or a hobbyist miniature person was like apoplectic, like, oh, this is terrible, I can't even play with these. So they definitely skimped on the quality of the miniatures, which is a shame for a Kickstarter project, but not a deal breaker by any means. At least you have that much plastic in, again, a Euro-style area control game. I never imagined that I would see a lot of miniatures in a game like that. Now, going on to the gameplay, there's some really interesting elements here. The whole aspect of, I kind of stressed heavily in my overview of how, and we'll talk about the 3 to 4 player game first, how you take actions. And it is this typical action, okay, I pass type thing, but it's way different than that. The whole aspect of taking the tokens, the pools of tokens which dictate which actions you can take, which may have been in other Martin Wallace games, but none that I personally have played. This is one of the few Martin Wallace games I played that didn't involve deck building, so that's a drastic departure for me, but And how this one, you take whatever tokens are available, whichever spot you choose to take from, that dictates the action that you're going to take. And it can be very different depending on what it is. And once those tokens are gone, you can't do it unless you take the passing action, which is another very interesting thing. I've played a lot of games that have this action, pass mechanism. Usually when you pass, you're totally out. That's it. Maybe something will drag you back in, but in this one, it's interesting because you can pass and say, well, I have nothing else I can do. But then it gets back around to you, the game is still active. Not everyone has passed. You're like, well, okay, at least I put my token somewhere where I can get the best usage out of it, which usually is like the orange tokens, the mutation tokens. Be like, okay, at least I can start working towards popping out another monster. So if you're forced to pass early because you don't have as many actions or not doing as much useful stuff as the other players, you're not necessarily totally out, and I think that's very interesting. And it leads to a weird sort of planning out, like how early do I want to go out, and how long do I want to string this out, knowing that I'm giving the other players more actions. At what point do I just say, okay, we're done. I'm passing 2, we're ending this round. So that's pretty interesting there. And I mean, the area control aspects of the game work, and it's interesting. There are some clunky bits to this game. It's difficult for me to put my finger on it, but it doesn't feel like a smooth game. Everything is there and it works individually, but altogether it's kind of rough. I should mention that the rulebook is pretty bad, at least for the multiplayer version of the game. It's just walls of text, and trying to get to the pertinent information is kind of tough. So that didn't help us out. But even after I'd played the game the first time and knew basically what to do, it was still just some rough edges to the game. Like, things just don't seem to make sense. Everything's got its own little scoring mechanism, and how the troops come out doesn't make a lot of sense because everything is different. So, like, okay, I'm a monster and I want to attack an area. First, I can choose to fight the monsters, but if I want to fight the city, I just ignore the monsters altogether. But if I want to fight the city, I have to fight the troops first, and the troops have to be fought in a certain order. So that's all weird. Why not just, like, allow yourself to target a certain thing? And then how the troops attack is weird, too, because every one of them works differently. When the heroes come out, the heroes go, and they only can kill Drakors, but they can reveal other enemies. And then if they go into an area, then the infantry that are there can attack, and the other army units. But it's like, so it's all very weird. Like, everything feels connected but disjointed at the same time. And ultimately, a lot of the decision-making in the game doesn't feel all that pertinent. I think you can do very well in this game just running around the board, doing a little bit of damage to each different area, and at least getting on the board. Some of the ways that you get points aren't nearly as practical. Like, well, the Drakors can be good, but if people realize that you have them on the board, they're either going to kill them because they're not too difficult to kill, even though you have to do it in a certain way with the heroes or with the Shagu. I think you can do it with the Shagu. But at the end of the game, if people don't have the Drakors out, they spam them all at the same time. That's part of the weird thing about this game. Not really interesting, kind of a bad thing about the game is that at certain points, everyone's doing the same thing. At the beginning of the game, everyone is just grabbing those orange tokens as much as possible, to the point where I think, like, the rule setup should just say everyone starts with X amount of orange tokens, disperse them how you will to pop out whatever monsters you want, then start the game. Because in the first round, it's just like everyone just keeps grabbing the orange, and whoever can get the most of them is going to do a little bit better leading into the next round, assuming they use them wisely. And then the thing with the Drakors is that at the end of the game, everyone just puts all of them out wherever they can, which leads to them being, well, okay, but we've got a lot of them here, which means that we're not going to get that many points for them. So it's just weird. I mean, that's the best thing. It's not really very helpful as a word to describe the game, but that's how I felt. Everything is kind of just clunky. Even with the area control elements, even though that should be the most straightforward aspect of it, still, it feels like, shouldn't I get a bonus for destroying an entire city? Or why is it that you can just come in and destroy the city a little bit and still get a point? And I don't know, the way that ties work, it's all just a little bit off. And ultimately, because everyone kind of had the same intention, and because the game doesn't even incentivize fighting that much, fighting the city, yes, but if you can avoid the human units and avoid the other monsters, fantastic. Which is another odd thing. And like, even with your city tokens, where it's like, okay, I have these protected cities that I want to do my best to protect, but how do you do that exactly? I mean, you can say like, oh, you're attacking my city, I gotta run over there and kill you. Well, okay, now people know what city you have, so they can just say, well, I'm definitely going to destroy the city, since I want to destroy all the cities anyways. And ultimately, why would you bother? I mean, if it's going to get destroyed anyways, if someone might just drop an A-bomb on it or carpet bomb it with the fighters, then why not just say, well, if that happens, it happens, great, who cares? I'm just going to worry about destroying all this other stuff and do my other win conditions and getting how I get victory points. Because it's almost like, if it happens, it happens. If I get the points for those, I do. If I don't, I don't. So it feels like in the effort to make the game a little bit simpler, there were some things that were just sort of cut around, and I just feel like there's something missing. And I don't want to say that because I know that Martin Wallace is a very, very good designer, and I know that he plans these things out and play tests them, and this is based off an existing game that was supposed to be tweaked. But still, to me, I just felt like this could be a fantastic game, but certain things just feel so wonky that I can't get into it as much as I want to, despite how great a theme it is. Now, the two-player game is a different beast, and I like it better. I don't think it's the greatest thing ever, but the whole aspect of having a team, and they all have their own special abilities, and how it's like asymmetric to a point, and especially in how you achieve your victory, and like the heroes want to run and get equipment, and then the monsters all have their own different special abilities, and they want to destroy the buildings. That's very interesting. I like the whole milling through your hand and being able to use as many cards as you want, but knowing that you have a limited hand refill at the end of each of your turns. But the heroes having their own special abilities on the cards and deciding which people to when to dump those cards to use for their special abilities or use them to activate. That was much more interesting to me, perhaps because I'm more prone to like games that involve cards in at least a somewhat major way. That felt like a tighter game. Whereas Moongha just kind of felt very like, what am I supposed to be doing here? I know there's a strategy here, but I feel like everyone's after the same strategy, so what's the point? In the two-player game, it was very straightforward. Here's what I want to do, how do I make that happen in the most efficient way possible with the cards that I have and wanting to keep my opponent on their toes as much as possible. So that was a solid game. Not great, but pretty good. And the 3 to 4 player game, I just wasn't feeling it, despite the fact that it works, it's okay. It just wasn't quite for me, despite how awesome the theme and the pieces are. But that's Moongha Invaders. At least one half of it is pretty good. I know there's some people who are going to really love both parts of it. It definitely has the theme to spare. At least check it out, give it a shot, find out for yourself. Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.